thing.
Yeah.
And I think Art asked before the screening, how many was familiar with the story? Not too many, right? Just a handful? Okay, great. So we'll just jump right in. I'll ask the first question. I'll walk around with the mic and raise your hand if you have questions. Art, I mean, this is such a fascinating story. When did you first hear about it, and what made you jump into thinking that it would make a documentary?
Muhammad Ali passed on June 3rd, 2016, and I at the time was in my studio in Atlanta editing a small project. I froze. I knew he had been in feeble health over the preceding few years. It's just that the realization that he was not going to be around anymore had struck me in a way which I hadn't contemplated. I couldn't even fathom. And I had recently moved to Atlanta, maybe a year or so before, and I had coincidentally began to receive my first copy of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution from my subscription, and it had an article in that paper. That over that weekend, there were several more articles that I had seen, and by Sunday, they had an entire inset or I should say a pullout with regard to Ali and his relationship with the city of Atlanta. And then it rekindled my thinking that, yeah, that's right, I'm in the city that gave rebirth to Ali's career in 1970. And just like so many other people who may be old enough to have been around during that time, I think there was such an overwhelming feeling about joy and elation that he was going back into the ring that almost nobody stopped to ask the simple question, how did that happen? That's when I brought the members of my team together and I said, I'd like to investigate this because there's a plethora of films out there about Ali's life and his career on a multiplicity of levels. So I thought, let's just do a little research. And the other three members of my team and myself, we looked at as many Ali films as we could over the course of about 7 days. We came back together in my studio and we realized that there were a few people, such as Michael Mann's Ali movie, that references it, but it really doesn't give the actual story. And that's when I thought, this is the time for us to begin to actually start doing some research to create a production about how he came back into the ring. And he died in June 3rd. We started pre-production July 1st.
Wow. How familiar were you before you saw the articles in the Atlanta newspaper? Did you know anything about the history of making the fight?
Actually, no, I knew absolutely nothing. I just knew that, I didn't even know that Joe Frazier was the original person that was on the license for Ali to go back into the ring that was created by Senator Leroy Johnson, who had started the very first boxing commission in the state of Georgia, in the city of Atlanta in 1970. I only knew that he was fighting against Joey Quarry, who they were dubbing the Great White Hope at that time. And I think I was as naive or as ignorant as almost everybody else was at that time. The intriguing element here is, as a filmmaker, you go in with your own preconceived notion as to what you think you're going to find. Being a journalist myself, having been a photojournalist in New York City for several years, I was trained to first follow the actual information wherever it leads you, but also I was trained to follow the money too. Okay, so, and in the process of doing the research for the film, Robert Castle, who you see on the screen, I had no clue about who he was, because my preconceived notion was that I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the city that gave birth to the civil rights movement. So you have these powerful icons such as Ralph Abernathy and Julian Bond and C.T. Vivian, who were giants in the civil rights movement. And I'm thinking they probably were somewhere within the backdrop of creating this meaningful event in 1970. That was not the case. The name Robbie Castle, I learned about as a result of the research. And the more I researched, the more I realized that the key people that were involved in making this happen was Robbie Castle, Mayor Sam Massell, and Senator Leroy Johnson. And as I tell people oftentimes, that from a cultural standpoint, what we see happening in the creation of Ali's comeback is America at her best. Because here you have two Jews and a Christian who come together to make it possible for a Muslim to have a career again.
And speaking of Robert Castle, in your conversations with him, I believe you mentioned that other people have tried to tell this story, but they, for whatever reasons, they failed to do that, and you somehow got over that hurdle.
My ability to get Robert Castle, because he wasn't an easy individual to lure in for this piece. I originally, once his name came up in the research, I started to look into how can I contact this gentleman. And my producer said, well, let's see if he's on Facebook. I didn't find him on Facebook, but I found his daughter on Facebook. And I wrote to her, told her what I was in the process of doing. And she actually gave me his email address. And then I wrote a letter that basically laid out what I had in mind, what my intent, my motivation was. And he shared it with his wife, Maureen. And it was Maureen, his wife, who looked at it. He was not going to call me. And his wife said, I think you should call this young man and give him a shot. And if it wasn't for Maureen, I wouldn't have gotten Robert. But there was something that she read within the content of my letter that made her think that this producer is going to be different.
I'll open up for questions. So, questions?
This is an actor?
Were there any other folks that you wanted to get that you weren't able to? Either they were just didn't want to be involved or too old?
Oh, yes, there was a slew of other people I wanted to get. I wanted to get Bill Cosby, because Bill Cosby, as I was saying to someone who was part of the audience, at the end of the fight with Jerry Quarry and Muhammad Ali, you're hearing Tom Carden, but then there's a second voice that comes in after him, very briefly. That's the voice of Bill Cosby. There were two announcers that were ringside that night. In addition to which, I wanted to have an interview with Barbara Streisand, who was there at the fight that night. And there was Harry Belafonte, and I wanted to also reach out to Diana Ross. Those were the other people that I wanted to get into the film. Actually, when I was talking to Jim Brown, he was saying, you might want to talk to Bill Russell. And I said, yeah, but was Bill Russell at the fight? And he said, no, he wasn't at the fight. And I had to very graciously decline the offer to do Bill Russell. I mean, I love Bill Russell, both as an athlete and as a activist, but I had to keep things extremely streamlined to what I was trying to achieve, because almost everybody who I talked to, from big time stars and celebrities to waitresses in restaurants, would tell me stories about their encounter with Muhammad Ali. It was amazing the number of people who had a Muhammad Ali story in the process of doing this. And if I had stopped to put a camera on everybody that told a story, this would be a never-ending story. So I had to keep it limited to people who knew him between 1967, where our story begins, and 1970, where it ends. Okay, and there was one other person who I really had a great conversation with, who you may recall because she was the first African-American female sports announcer on ABC, or actually, period. And Ali had a lot to do with her getting that job. That was Jane Kennedy. And she and I had a really wonderful conversation. And in the course of the conversation, I had said to her, Jane, when did you and Ali first meet? Oh, I met Ali in 1974. And then there was a pregnant pause. And I said, Jane, I can't use you. And I can imagine on the other end of the phone, she was probably going, what you mean you can't use me? No, I can't. You met him after our film ends. I really can't use you. And the only reason we used Evander Holyfield is because, who was 8 years old at the time of the fight, is because he helps us to tell the story of the impact of the fight between Ali and Jerry Quarry and the floodgates that opened up to create all the other fights that came later, and also to cement his connection to the city of Atlanta.
Thank you on a very illuminating and great film. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
You like my Ollie shirt?
I love it.
Thank you.
Yes.
I wanted to talk, if you could share with us a little bit about the process of getting the film done from start to finish. How did you fund it? Who were the stakeholders at the beginning? I saw that Maxi Priest was one of the producers, the great reggae artist. So talk a little bit about how the process of getting the film done.
The production process for us, I must say, in some ways we were fortunate in that I had spent a good part of my professional career working internationally, in the Far East as well as in Europe, but most concentrated in the last 10 years in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and lastly Bahrain. And so when I came back to the United States, we were in a position financially where we could underwrite something such as Ali's comeback without worrying too much about the Corporation of Public Broadcasting or the Ford Foundation or any of these other grant-making institutions taking 2 to 3 years just to tell us no. And I felt the urgency to get this film out as expeditiously as possible. And so the overwhelming underwriting for the film came from Dream Factory's office itself. However, I need to give credit to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport because we had done 3 60-second trailers for Hartsfield-Jackson, and it played in the airport for about 6 months because they realized that our film is about Muhammad Ali's return to the ring in 1970 in the city of Atlanta. So they sort of said, partly a means to promote the airport and the city of Atlanta. So they gave us a really nice chunk of money to help us get the ball rolling with the film. And we did do one crowdfunder, Kickstarter campaign, and there were some really nice people who gave us $5, $10, $15, but the overwhelming bulk of the funding that went into making this quality of a production happen came from my company. Also, I gotta give credit to the members of my team because most of them came on under what is known as contingency agreements. That is, contingent upon our ability to actually put the film into the market to recoup the investment, then we would be in a position to pay them. But there was such a desire, such an enthusiastic burning desire by my camera people, by my editor, by my graphic designer, by my reenactors, that they would just, listen, we want to be a part of this. They really emotionally were connected to helping to tell the story.
Questions?
Hi, yeah, thank you for the.
This lady back
That's
here.
okay,
Yeah.
I can go after.
Oh, sorry. I was curious about the heist that happened after the fight. If there's any stories about that, or if there's any follow-up information there.
I think from 2019 when we had the world premiere at the Pan African International Film Festival to now, we've had maybe, I would say a good 26, 27 screenings of the film. Not once have a Q&A ended without someone asking about the after party. Not once has that happened. I mean, we almost
last night.
Almost last night, okay? Because we were talking for the better part of at least an hour, and I was really surprised that we talked about various aspects of the film, but no one asked about the after party. Interesting that you asked that, because on that very note, two of my producers have actually been nudging me to do a 5-part doc series where we could actually take each of the various rounds that you see in the film and expanding them into essentially 60-minute episodes, and to be able to do justice, real justice to the after party. We're talking about a number of high-level celebrities as well as hustlers who came to this house that was in a very secluded area. It was an African-American enclave. It was an upscale black enclave, but it was a very secluded area. And they rolled up in their Rolls Royces and in their Eldorados and in their Rivieras, and they were decked. I mean, literally, the men who came, especially the hustlers who came in their fur coats, that was the fight that established hustlers wearing fur coats. And if you saw American Gangster, what actually was a kind of given in that movie, that was established initially in Ali's comeback fight in 1970 against Jerry Quarry. But these people came in dripping with tremendous amount of jewelry and fur coats. And many people have said to me, oh, the men look finer than the women. That's how well dressed they were. And there were 6 people that were inside the house. There's this really beautiful African-American woman who stood at the door, and she welcomed everybody in. And when they came inside, once they crossed the threshold, they were met by these men dressed in black with black masks, and they were polite. These were the most polite gangsters ever, because they politely escorted them down to the basement, and once they got them into the basement, they said, you need to give me your furs, and we need the diamonds, and we need the rubies, and we need, oh, if you got any money, we'll take that too, and oh, by the way, you gotta take everything off. And the only reason they stopped was because the basement got full, and it was becoming a health hazard. That's the only reason they stopped. Because and I would love to be able to see the look on the face of the guy and his girlfriend or his wife who got turned away because they couldn't let any more people in the basement, and he was like, probably kicking and screaming because they wouldn't let him in, and he didn't know how lucky he was. Okay. No, I mean, that entire piece could be a film itself. The after party is, we have so much rich information that we did not put on the screen about the after party. We just didn't have the time to do it. But I'll keep you in mind and make sure I put you on my mailing list so that in the event that we do get to do a multiple part series, I will make you aware.
Thank you. You may have just hit on some of it, but so I'm thinking about the message, the layers of history that were addressed here, and the conflict, the barriers that had to be broken down for this to happen, for the fight to happen. And how do young people continue to see this message? Where do you see this film going so that it can continue to be seen?
I see the film, well, let me tell you where it's been before I tell you where it's going, okay? The film has been a part of the, initially, the Pan-African American International Film Festival in LA. And this is the largest African American film festival in the United States. They have over 150 films that are showcased over 2 weeks, and they come from all over the world. And actually, it was at that one film festival that I was invited by other film festival directors to come and be a part of this. So it's been at the AFI. It's been, it was picked up by the African Diaspora Film Festival, which had a screening in Chicago, it had a screening in Washington, D.C., a screening in Paris, France, and it had a screening in New York City. And we also had been picked up by the Atlanta History Center. We had an Atlanta premiere to a stand-up audience in on January 17th of 2020. We were the last major show that was at the Atlanta History Center before COVID hit. And we had actually several other theatrical screenings that were lined up, but everything had to come to a screeching halt because of that. However, that said, and what we were looking at, especially with what I saw happening with the audience that was here last night, which I thought was extremely engaged in not just the film, but in having a very vibrant exchange between myself and the other two panelists that were up here, is that this film is a kindly reminder of the fact that the struggle for freedom and independence and dignity and respect is an ever-going one. It's not, there's no such thing as we've arrived, and so now we can shift our energy and our focus and look at something else. When you talk about keeping one's eyes on the prize, that prize is dignity and respect, and it's something that is going to be a continuous struggle regardless. And I just wanted to say, I was talking to somebody, I think I was talking to you yesterday, Brad, when I was talking about another project that I'm working on that focuses on the origin of whiteness in the United States of America. And I was sharing with Brad that not just African Americans, even though we are the ones who have yet to arrive to rise above the stigma of our color in this land, but you're talking about Irish people who came to this land after the potato famine in the 1850s, and they were treated like niggers when they got here too. Okay, in fact, Muhammad Ali's great grandfather is the result of, I should say, he married an African American woman in Boston because when he came here as an Irish immigrant, they were put into African American enclaves because they wanted to put the European niggers with the African American niggers. Okay, and that's where that relationship, where they met each other, they fell in love, and they got married. And there's a province in Ireland called Ennis, which is I guess where Muhammad Ali's great grandfather came from, and they think of Ali as being theirs. There are shops on top of shops on top of shops that have newspapers and magazines and books and clippings and buttons and all different kind of paraphernalia with regard to who Muhammad Ali was. If anything was ever created, they have it in Ennis. And when Ali, if you go on to YouTube, you'll see something. You might just type in, I think it's ENNIS Ireland. If you type that in, you'll see the actual time that Ali went to visit, and he was treated as if he was royalty. He's theirs. Okay, but I'm saying that to say that we have had a number of different ethnic groups and religious groups that's come to this country. If you were not white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and from England, you had a struggle. Okay.
Mr. Jones, when I came in, I told you that there was not much I didn't know about Muhammad Ali.
I remember.
Yeah, that was because of over the years, you know, my wife and I, we had contact with him in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, when he was in Reading at Deer Lake. We would go there sometime to watch him train, and he also attended some meetings. Now, I was aware of when he was suspended from the ring. I was aware of some of the players that were involved in getting him back into the ring, but I didn't know all of the politics. So I want to say to you, oh yeah, I want to say that at the end. Yeah, I had all that in mind. My wife reminded me of something. And, you know, you've done an excellent job. It's very educational, very enlightening. And also I want to mention this, my wife just told me I should mention that she and myself, we attended Muhammad Ali's janazah, his funeral. You know, so, but I wanna just commend you on what you've done. I thought I had watched everything, you know, I was an ID expert, and in some ways I am, but I know boxing. But, like I say, the politics were somewhat beyond me. I didn't know all of the struggles he had to go through in order to get back into the ring. And thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Muhammad Ali's been a presence in my life from childhood and on into young adulthood and to the present day. Yeah, so I lived through a lot of the things we saw on TV.
You may want to bring the mic a little closer to your mouth.
Oh, sorry.
That's what they told me last night.
I wondered what have you observed among current younger generations, the impact that your film has had on them?
There are not many young people who have had an opportunity to see the film, but of the few that have,